sharing my page too. So,
Okay, very good.
Hey everyone, welcome to this live streaming. I am Eden Holt with The Connection Effect, and today I have Altina with the Odd Whimsy. She is an artist, an incredible artist, and she's going to share with us some beautiful artwork, but also how you can connect with her and how it relates to you in your personal life and things that maybe are not necessarily inside the box whenever it comes to art, being integrated into your daily life and things that help you live a more healthy and happy life. So thank you for being here.
thank you
Altina.
for inviting me. I'm so excited to do this.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about you, like how you got started in this. And
Okay, so I've been creative my entire life. Some of my earliest memories are sitting at my grandparents' wooden table and playing with watercolor and Play-Doh and anything I could get my hands on. I wasn't allowed the acrylic paint because supposedly I did the walls. I don't remember this, but yeah, so those are some of my earliest memories. So I've just been doing something creative in some form my entire life.
wow, I love that. And so tell me a little bit about how you got started in this particular media.
So I'm a mixed media artist, which if you don't know what that means, it means I get to play with all the things all at once. It's my favorite because there really are no rules with mixed media, which is great. I got started about 5 or 6 years ago. I was in therapy for severe anxiety, which I still deal with on a daily basis. And my therapist wanted to get me to keep a written journal. And I'm not a writer. I'm like, that's never going to happen. So I stumbled across by accident the art journaling community by going to Hobby Lobby, and I found an art journal and I was like, what is this? So I looked it up and it was just being artistic in a journal format. And so I just took the things I was already doing, a lot of abstracts with, pencils and watercolors, and just learned to do it in a journal to kind of get those expressions out. And it became a daily habit for me to help with my anxiety. And so it was writing, but in an artistic way.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I love that.
Thank you.
And so, one of the things that I talk to my clients about whenever we work together is how we can integrate different parts of the balance wheel through various services and products, available to us. But also some of those segments in the balance wheel regarding maybe the body and the mind and the emotions that we experience and that we deal with, in our human existence, relate back to your ability to put your thoughts and your emotions onto paper. And so that's how we are connecting, sharing that with them. So whenever you talk about, dealing with anxiety and things that that are really hard to process, maybe on your own, but giving a place for it to live. Yeah, that's so important. Being able to get it out and put it on paper in a way that you can visually see it, but then reference later on. It's so good.
Right. And it doesn't have to be anything major. So part of the great thing about art is you can do literally whatever you want. If you want to draw, if you want to just color. Some days, if I'm dealing with something really hard and I don't know what to do, I'll just literally, like a little 2-year-old or 3-year-old, and take the paints and the finger paint, and just finger paint and a crayon, like a little kid would hold it and just do circles. So it's great because it's however you want to get whatever you're dealing with emotionally out is how you can express it through the page. If you want to draw, some days I draw faces and I'll do these really big eyes, and some days those kind of hold the expressions that people have told me. Some days I will write and I'll hide it, or I'll write it in a way that you would never know what I've written. I never know what I've written because of how I write it, because it's just helping to let it go and get it out.
Yeah, and that's so important whenever we're processing emotions, especially. But also, one of the things that you mentioned to me previously is that it doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah. That's one of the great things about art that I think people tend to forget about is that it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be pretty because it's for you. You are doing it to help yourself in whatever way it helps you. And most people are never going to see what you've created. People see my stuff because it's what I do, and I teach people how to do this. And so I kind of show you some of those beginning processes, and you really have to learn that you're going to grow as you do this. And the more you do it, and the more your style changes. Like when I first started, I was doing only abstracts because I believed I could not draw. Well, proved myself wrong by just putting the practice in and learning how to do it. But it doesn't have to be pretty. I don't know if you've ever looked at some of Pablo Picasso's works in person.
Yes.
Some of his stuff is really ugly, and he's in museums, you know, so it doesn't have to be pretty. One of my examples, because most people on my Instagram, they see my finished or my current workings. They don't usually see my beginning stuff. And so this is actually the very first 2 art journal pages I ever did. And as you can see, they're not very pretty. But that's the great thing. They don't have to be. I still love these pages. I still reflect on what I was going through and getting to see my journey of where I'm at now with just these pages. This journal is literally falling apart with age and wear, and it's still one of my most prized possessions because it's where I started.
Right.
So
yeah. And one of the things that drew me to you to begin with was how you gave yourself room to grow naturally by just putting it all out there, but then also allowing yourself to develop your own techniques and your own way of doing things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of the great things about this, especially with mixed media, is because you literally can play however you want to play. I've talked to artists who wanted to learn watercolor and they wouldn't do it because they're like, oh, you have to leave the white space. I'm like, that's what a white paint pen's for. Just put it back. It's, you know, it's however you want to do it. There are certain rules to certain mediums, like colored pencils are not going to go great on top of acrylic paint because the surface just isn't there. There's certain rules you do have to follow, but for the most part, you can do whatever you want. This is one of my more current workings within the last 2 years. And this is there again, that progression and just learning to let yourself try and grow, because 5 years ago, if you had told me I could do faces, I would have laughed in your face because my older brother could do the drawing and all that, and I could do a stick figure. So just practice and put it in. But this is one of those happy, you know, accidents. It's kind of hard to see on camera, but the pencil that's in her hair is actually under the acrylic paint because it was a mistake. I had meant to put the acrylic down and then put some medium on top to help the pencil stick. Totally didn't even think about it. Put the pencil down first and I was like, oh, great. So now what do I do? So I just took some of the things I've learned along the way, which is about transparent paints and things like that, put some transparent paint on it, and it fixed it. And it's now a technique that I use all the time. So that's one of the great things about it, is just playing. And that kind of goes back to that. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't even have to be finished. It's just for you because it's helping you work through whatever it is you're needing to work through.
Yeah. And, you know, back to that picture that you just showed us, creating that technique for yourself, even if someone else isn't using that or it doesn't apply to what they're doing, it works for you.
Right.
And you're using it consistently now within your own art. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Happy accidents.
Yes.
From just playing, really.
Yeah. And so I am wondering, how long have you been doing this, did you say?
Well, personally, I've been doing it about 6 years, maybe a little longer, but professionally, I've been doing it about 4.
Okay. And so if someone were curious about maybe learning some of these techniques that you are using, or maybe wanting to dive into art journaling or using some of the media that you do, how would they go about doing that with you? How would they connect with you?
Well, you can follow me on Instagram, which is AMRTLJ. And you can message me and just say, hey, I'd like to do some classes with you. I do in person. I will do a few over Zoom, and hopefully within the next few months, I'll have some online pre-filmed classes going up on my website, which should be done within the next couple of weeks. So
I love that. So I really wanted to touch on the fact that that whenever you put something on the paper, it's kind of what you're thinking, or maybe what you're feeling in that moment, or just trying to get something out, processing it, and you're not really sure what it would look like at first, but you're just putting it out there. What are some things that you would share with people? Maybe some tips or suggestions if they are maybe going through a time when they feel like they need to create or
Sure.
something.
So some of the places that I tell people to start is sometimes just sitting down and doodling is a great thing. There are times I'll sit down not realizing that I am needing to work through something, and I'll just sit down to paint because I love to paint, and I try to do it every day. I don't do a finished piece every day, but I try to just sit down and do a little something every day. And I highly encourage people to do that because it helps them work through things they may not even realize they're working through. But on days where you're like really frustrated and you really want to get that frustration out, one of my favorite things to tell people to do is a crayon, again, like a little 2-year-old, and just grip it and just doodle, circle, get some of that aggression out. It's really fun if you get watercolor soluble crayons, because then you can go back and make even more of a mess with water or splattering paint. Or one of the techniques that I do a lot is I will just write, and I'll write and write and write, and I'll write over itself to the point where all you see is just all these scribbles. And sometimes that's good enough. And then you can go back later and paint over it with some gesso, or just build a piece of art on top of it. So
yeah, that's so cool that because there are so many different types of media that you can use between writing utensils and paint. And what are some of those things that you use on a regular basis?
My regular basis tools are watercolor, colored pencils, and acrylic paint. Those are my absolute favorite things to use and work with. So inks, anything bright, visceral. I love that kind of stuff. And I love to splatter. You will see splatter on all of my pages almost. White splatter, black splatter, silver splatter, gold splatter. If I can splatter it, it's getting splattered across the page somewhere. So I will grab whatever I'm gravitating towards. Some people will use that color theory of red as a power color or an anger color, blue is calming. Some people will use that color with emotion to kind of help working out what they are. I don't pay attention half the time. Half the time I'm like, ooh, I like this color orange today, I'm going to use that. So it's just whatever you're gravitating towards. Intuition is a huge part of it.
Yes, for sure. And having things available, or just picking up whatever is available in your reach. But if you were to have someone come to you and say, Altini, what is one thing that I should use or that I could use in this moment, what would you recommend?
I would probably pick up a watercolor palette, or watercolor in your 3 favorite colors. I do recommend spending a little bit more on your art supplies, just because you do get what you pay for with art supplies. So sometimes, like if you're on a severe budget, anybody can make Crayola work. I've seen huge artists that I follow that make Crayola into masterpieces. So if you're not sure you like a medium, get the basic cheapest thing that you can find. And if you decide you love it, then invest a little bit more, because you'll see the quality. So watercolor is usually where I tell people to start. Or if you want to do watercolor and pencils and can't swing both, get you a set of watercolor pencils, because then you can kind of have a little bit of the best of both worlds.
Yeah,
with that
makes sense. And so your art journal is a book, and I've gotten to see it a few times. I love having that privilege to be able to see it. Do you recommend getting an art journal, or are there things that maybe some tools that people should get?
Well, you can start on anything. That's part of the best part. If you have a journal that you have already, if it's just a standard writing journal and you don't mind the pages kind of crinkling and not working quite right, being a little careful, you can totally work in that. Loose paper journals that you can buy at the store, watercolor journals that you can buy in the store. I actually make my journals because I am incredibly picky about my paper, as long as I've been doing this. So one of the cheapest papers you can get is actually Canson watercolor paper in 140 pound. You can get it at Michael's for a pad of it. I think it's like $10, $15, super cheap. will take anything. So but you really could use anything you wanted. So,
Yeah.
but I recommend like just kind of browsing the art aisle and looking at papers and seeing what you might think you want. And the best thing again is if you're doing mixed media, you can kind of use any paper you want. I like watercolor paper, but I put acrylic on top of it and everything else. So
Yeah, you use a lot of things on your.
I do.
On yours. Yeah, it's a blank canvas though, so
Yes.
you really get to just play around with it.
Yeah.
And put whatever you want on it.
And canvases too. If you don't want to work on paper, canvases are great. You can get cheap bulk packs of them.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't have to be expensive to start.
Yeah.
So
I love that. And, you know, anybody can do that.
yeah.
Yeah. You don't have to be an educated artist or, you know, even a professional artist. Anybody can go to the art store or even just a department store and pick one up.
Well, and I've even heard of people going to thrift stores and buying the old paintings and recycling the canvases. So if you like to upcycle, that's a great way to do it.
I would never have even thought about that.
I haven't done it personally, but I know artists who have. So
yeah, upcycling. Yes, definitely want to upcycle as much as we can.
And sometimes you can find really cheap art supplies at thrift stores too, if you don't mind.
True. Yeah, that's a good point. And so one of the things that I wanted our audience to know is that you do offer to do commissions and as well as teaching people how to use whatever's within them to create. So I would love for you to share that.
Yeah, so I have a few people who they have no interest in doing it themselves or learning that way. So they'll actually come to me for commissions, which I love doing because I have a very whimsical style. So people who want to work with me can contact me again through Instagram or the oddwhimsy.com, which is my website that should be ready in a couple weeks, hopefully. And just tell me kind of what you want, what you're thinking, and we'll just kind of go from there. So I do a little of everything. Also, if you see any of my art that you really like, I have prints available and can make them in pretty much any size. So
I love that. And then so you also teach people how to create. Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Yeah, so basically if you've never sat with me before, we'll talk about where you are in your creative process. If you're a complete beginner and you know nothing, if you're, you know, somewhere in the middle, or you've been doing art for a while and you just want to learn some new techniques or some new stylings, we'll sit down and we'll have like a 30-minute consult. We'll figure out where you are, what you want to do, and then I'll sit down and make a lesson plan that fits with what you're wanting to learn. So if you're just wanting to learn some abstract techniques, or if you're wanting to learn how to draw and do faces, or just how you get started in art journaling and you don't particularly care about what techniques, you just want to sit down and learn the basics of an art journal. Yeah, I'm open to teaching whatever it is you want to learn. So I just like to teach and I like to share art and how to do it with everybody. So I'm open to all skill levels.
Yeah. And I love that you are open to teaching it, because whenever you share about your art, you are so excited, and I can feel your warmth and your excitement just sitting next to you, but also hearing it and knowing that you're so passionate about it. You know, that translates to, you know, connecting with people that also want to learn and also want to understand your process, your creative process, and how they can make their own art journal, or, you know, even if it's not an art journal,
right?
Just to start somewhere.
Exactly. That's the thing that I think people have the hardest time getting over, is that, where do I start? Well, if you're brand new, I'll walk you through it. I'll hold your hand. Whatever we need to do to get you on your path is what we'll do. So
yeah, and I know we haven't really touched on this, but I know that you also have a different career, a different job outside of this, and so and you know, you can talk about that if you'd like to, but I know that it's a completely different side of.
Completely. I'm an accountant for my day job. So yeah, I work in property management, and it's a completely different world than what I do.
Yeah, but I know that you also enjoy that.
I do.
You are analytical in that side of things, but using this other creativity and this gift to create and share with other people, that's just, not just, it's inspirational.
Thank you.
To see that both sides of you. And, it's also encouraging for anyone that isn't really sure, if this is something that they would be interested in, or if it's for them. Maybe they're very focused on a certain way of learning things or a certain way of doing things.
Yeah.
This could be something that opens them up.
Right. And I've been teaching in some format for many, many years. I was a trainer for many years. At my current job and previous jobs, I trained people. So I'm really adept with working with whatever style you've got to learning. So don't be afraid to be like, oh, I have such a hard time learning because I have to learn this way. That's fine. I can adjust. So I love teaching and I love adjusting to what everybody needs. So
yeah. And I know this about you, that you are very good at relating to people. And so you kind of meet them where they are, from whatever background they're coming from, and whatever it is that might be holding them back from letting all of their artistic abilities flow.
Yeah. And I love getting lost in the details. So if you're a detail oriented person, sorry, words, then I'm great. I love to get lost in those details with you. But if you're not so focused on the details, that's great too, because I love just like, ooh, let's just put this blob here and see what happens. So
kind of like a Bob Ross, but not a Bob Ross.
No, yeah. It's a little of everything in there,
Yeah.
So some days it's Bob Ross, some days it's Van Gogh.
Yeah.
Some days we have a little bit of Picasso in there, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, but to have fun with it.
Yes, that's the most important part. Having fun in your art, even if you're working through something, is the most important part.
Yeah.
And I think people forget that. I think they get caught up in that it has to look like something or it has to be a particular color. But go look at some of the Impressionist painters, which are my personal favorites, which is why I keep mentioning them. And you'll see the styling and the fact that they painted the world, not as it was, but as they saw it. I mean, if you've ever looked at some of Van Gogh's, some of those rich colors are not certain colors you would see, or Starry Night even is not what a real starry night looks like, but that's the way he saw it.
Yeah.
So that's great part of it, is it's what you see.
Yeah.
Even if it's an abstract, it can still be how you see your world.
Yeah. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect.
No. Perfect or pretty. Most people are probably never going to see what you're doing unless you're wanting to hang it on your walls, which is great. But if you're doing an art journal, most people are never going to see that. So that's one of the great things about it, not having to be pretty, not having to be finished, not having to be perfect, is you're the only person who's probably ever going to see it. People see mine because that's what I do. But I also show you what I think are ugly, the unfinished, the pieces that I love. So you get to see all that. Most people will never see it. So kind of work that out of your head and be like, it has to be pretty and perfect. No, it doesn't, because you're probably the only person who's ever going to lay eyes on it.
Yeah. And even if you do share it with people and they get to see, that you're processing it in this way, and you use this technique or this particular media or mediums. There we go.
There's multiple.
I think I keep saying it incorrectly.
It's fine.
Obviously I'm not in that world, but one of the hardest things for me to get over for myself has always been that I want it to be exactly the way that I'm envisioning it, and immediately, like that instant gratification. But just having that courage and taking that step to at least starting it, and then being willing to continue to work on it, maybe scrapping it and doing it again, or painting over it, or
sitting down with a plan. I don't do that very often because I find for me it never works out. But a lot of people are planners. So you could sit down with a plan and, for example, you could be like, I'm going to draw a whimsical face and I'm going to draw a face for it. And you start to draw it and the drawing kind of goes, nope, I'm going to look this way, or I'm going to be half asleep or whatever, which is what mine do. Sometimes just going with that flow and just letting it go and just going with what it is rather than trying to force it to be what's in your head. Sometimes that's half of getting it out, because I find that when I fight things, I get more frustrated. So if I just let it go with the flow, see where my drawing wants to go, because it is so much intuition based. Sometimes I wind up with some of the best things I've ever created.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be exactly like someone else's.
Right.
Because it's yours.
Exactly.
Even if you use an inspiration, you're still allowing yourself to put your own twist on it, or just using that intuition, like you said, but just putting it on the canvas, on the paper, or whatever it is, and putting your own touch to it, your own color splash, or
right.
You know, that I think that it's like freedom. It's like that breath of fresh air. That's like, okay, I can create this however I want to.
Exactly. And I tell people, don't be afraid to copy when you're first learning. You know, you want to find artists that you like and admire and maybe copy their work, take some lessons from them. With my pre-recorded lessons, you know, I'm giving you a face or an abstract or something that I want you to copy, because you're going to learn. And the more you go, you're going to learn what things you like to work with, what things you don't like to work with, what you want to draw, what you don't want to draw. And eventually you'll find that you're getting into your own stylization and things that you want to do and things that you love. So when I was learning to draw, all of my drawings were very much a dead copy of the artist I was learning from. And now they're my own thing. So even when I copy a lesson now, because I do still actively take lessons to learn and grow, you'll see where it looks like that person's painting, but you'll see my style. And sometimes that's how you learn new techniques. That's how you learn how to draw certain things or break certain things down. I know certain learn to draw techniques that work for a lot of people do not work well for me. So sometimes I'll learn from 2 or 3 artists and learn a way that works for me. So, or just play around and figure out what works for you.
Yeah. And that's a good point that you bring up. You're still taking classes or learning from other people. And so you're allowing yourself to build on your own skills and your own knowledge so that you can continue to develop and continue to create in ways still, you know, not yet discovered for yourself. So, you know, it touches on that self-development through the creative process, but also acknowledging that it doesn't have to, you don't have to stop with one particular style or one particular medium, that you can continue to grow. And
there again, if you go back and look at Picasso's works, he has a wide range from abstract to impressionism to realism. And it's interesting because you see his style changes throughout the year or years rather. And that there's another one, I believe it was Renoir, and you could see his stylization, and then he developed arthritis later in life, and his style totally changed with how he adjusted to learning to paint with arthritis. So even in the masters, you will see that change and progression. So you have to remember there's always progression. There's always room to grow. You just have to practice and keep putting in the work.
And the techniques may change. Things that you originally started with, you may adjust and change those. And also the development of your emotional well-being may go into it. You know, it may play a part into the techniques that you're using, but also what you're portraying, what you're putting onto the canvas.
Exactly. It'll change every time you sit down. So I never know when I sit down, am I going to work on a face? Am I going to work on an abstract? Is it going to be a face and an abstract? You know, do I want to do really whimsical, more realism, you know, a landscape, which I do on occasion. So yeah, it just depends on the day. And tools too, because sometimes one of my favorite things to paint with of all things is an old credit card. And I love to just take it and dip it in the paint and just straight down the page, or palette knives, or there's great things you can find around your house if you're on a very limited budget to paint with, draw with, scratch with. You know, most people, if you're on a really tight budget, or even I do this because I like the way it looks, most ballpoint pens are not water solid or waterproof. So you can draw something and then just take some water and running along those lines, get some shading. And
Mhm.
sometimes that's what I do. You don't have to sit down with the intention of, oh, I'm going to use all these things. Sometimes I sit down and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to just do a pencil. That's it. Graphite pencil and call it good. So
Yeah. And it also relates to anyone that may have any understanding of art, because you were saying, whatever's laying around at your house, using various papers in your art. I noticed that even in some of your pictures and your artwork, there's typed things.
Yes.
And that it brings it back to, it is what you create, whatever you want to put on the page.
Right. Whether you want to do decoupage or anything like that. The print you're referring to is really old books that were bound for the trash that, upcycling, again, it's a great thing. Little paint, some pens, you can kind of see that text coming through sometimes, or even just straight for collage or decoupage or however you want to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can use, again, that's one of the things I like about mixed media is I get to use all the things in one thing. Yeah. And I love that. I love that there's really no rules.
Yeah. And it just means that, yes, there's no rules, but also it's endless possibilities.
Exactly.
You can really create so easily when you have everything at your fingertips.
Exactly.
And so I think having the basic understanding that it doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't even have to be pretty, is what you've taught me, is so important.
Yes.
For people to relate to and connect to whenever they are starting their journey or even in the middle of it, but also how it applies to them, in their everyday lives.
Yeah.
That, just give it a chance.
Right.
Just try it.
Just little simple doodles even just start are great. And sometimes, like I said back in the beginning of our talk, sometimes you don't even realize that you're working through something until you've gotten through a whole thing and you're like, oh my goodness, I was working something out. Or, some days you're working through something and it's okay to not finish it all in one setting and come back to it. It's okay to set it aside if you need to, or do something else, or, do this one day and then come back and do something else. Just work until you feel that calm kind of release come out, and you can keep working while you're in that bubble. But if you're dealing with something really hard, then you can kind of move on too. So yeah, that's a great thing about it.
And you can always start over. You can use another page or start over on the page that you're working on. And I
gesso, cover it back up. You don't like it? Cover it up. I love black gesso for that, because if you do something really bright, you can just completely cover it up. And black gesso, it's so much fun to work on. Oh. It shows bright colors really well.
Okay.
And metallic watercolors on top of black gesso is gorgeous. Just saying. I like watercolor if you can't tell. Yes, so it's one of my favorite mediums.
Awesome. So I definitely wanted to let the audience know and our listeners know, what is your favorite thing about being an artist?
Oh goodness, that's a hard one. I was not prepared for this question. I don't know. I think I like sharing with people the most and seeing the art that brings people joy, even if it's something that I'm sitting there going, I really hate that piece, but you're fawning over it and loving it. And so sometimes hearing what people think is one of the best things. But I think close second to that would be my own quiet that I get with it. So with anxiety, I constantly have things running through my head, and it's one of the only times that I can sit down and totally zone out, and everything gets quiet and lovely, and I can just focus on what I want to focus, and I feel really good when I walk away. So probably a combination of those two things.
Yeah, which are kind of complete opposites of
I know.
each other.
They are, but
which is interesting.
My mother calls me a squirrel because I bounce from one end to the other. So
But I think that it's interesting that you mentioned both of those things, because I know that through your art journaling, it has helped you with your anxiety, but it can also help with confidence and being seen in the world and connecting with other people. And I know that that's what's important to you as well, connecting to people and relating to them on a deeper level. So it makes sense that that's, that you love sharing it with other people in a way that they're also giving you feedback. And
I mean, it's not about the compliments. It's more about the joy of seeing, I don't know if you've ever been to an art museum, but sometimes watching the little kids go through and look at all the paintings, wow, and the color, and it's almost like that, and not in a complimentary way, but I love just seeing the joy that it brings other people.
But it's also inspiration.
Yes.
So you are inspiring others as you're sharing your art journaling and your ability to create things outside of the box. Yeah.
That's half the fun.
Yes, for sure. Okay. Well, was there anything else that you would like to share with the audience, or?
Well, again, I have a website coming in a couple of weeks. It's going to be the oddwhimsy.com. And I teach everybody from the beginner, the expert, everybody in between. I've got something for everybody, whether you're wanting to learn art journaling to help with anxiety or just as a creative outlet, or you are already an artist and you just want to do something new. Even if you're familiar with art journaling or not, I've got a little something for everybody. So, and I love to share. So, even if you have just a basic art question and like, hey, what's your favorite watercolor? Just shoot me a message. We found on Instagram at AMRTLJ. So I'm happy to answer and make new friends. So
yes, for sure. Well, Altina, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ian, for having me. This has been great.
Good. Well, everyone, thank you so much for being here and watching this. I am going to list all of Altina's contact information for you to reach out to her directly if you would like to connect with her and to learn some of her expertise. And for now, I think that's it. And thank you so much for being here. We'll talk to you soon.